Again, I just think I admire his bravery here for speaking about these things publicly. Well, he didn't have to address this, right? Nobody knew. This could have been a private family matter between him and his wife. And I believe they have children. This could have been a private family matter. He chose to address it publicly, and I would imagine it's because he thinks that, like, hey, I'm going through this thing. There are other people who are probably going through this thing. And if I share my story, maybe other people could confront their truth or share their truths. Then maybe this could help somebody. So I admire that about him.
Because it's like, I hate to see things like this, and I also kind of hate to talk about them, but we'll talk about it nonetheless.
Don't be afraid. Address your feelings.
Yeah. So, a while back, we get stories of like celebrities, like we talked about Ben Affleck, dealing with issues of like sobriety and shit. And this past week, we got news of Dax Shepard, who he obviously he's an actor, and whatever. You see his fucking face on the screen. If you can see the screen, if you're listening to this on podcast form, then look him up on Google. You definitely have something where you can look up Google. So he revealed that he was dealing with episodes of Relapse, or relapses, because he was, I guess, in the program, so to speak, and he would sort of hit these markers where it was like 8 year, 16 year, and I think he finally got to like the 16 year marker, and it turns out that he wasn't as sober as he would have one believe. And so he was talking about kind of going through those struggles. And I think it was all done on a podcast too. It wasn't even, I think, it wasn't like he put out an official statement. I think he was just talking about this through a podcast. But so to kind of go through it a little bit, he I think was about 8 years into his sobriety, so to speak. And he had a motorcycle accident. And because of that, obviously there's like painkillers and things like that, but he, I think, was trying to like go to, he was maybe late for like set for work or whatever. And so he knew somebody who had some like Vicodin or some shit, or whatever the drug was. And so he took some. So he was like, I don't know, does that count as a relapse? If I had this motorcycle accident and I was trying to hurry up and get to where I'm trying to go, and I just needed something to kill the pain for a second, so there was that. And then he had some episodes with his father where, he was taking care of, I believe, his father had cancer or something of the sort. And he had to go take care of his father. And so obviously they prescribed all these, prescriptions for his father. And so he's like, hey, I'm in a little bit of pain. My dad's in a little bit of pain. Hey, let's take these perks, real quick, and so I think he had some issues there. That passed. And then he finally got to the point where I think he had like another motorcycle accident. And so then that's kind of where he really started sort of like, I think, falling off the wagon a bit. But I think through all of this, I don't think anybody publicly really sort of like knew any of this. And so they're like celebrating like, hey, you're sober and, 16 years. And so he describes how like he went through this point where they were celebrating his 16-year sobriety, but he was high as a kite at the time, and that he was like, that was like a struggle to like get through of like sort of living that sort of like false life.
Yeah.
And so, I've read all this and I came to the conclusion that, I don't know, maybe we all should just stay away from motorcycles. I feel like that was what I took out of this whole scenario
from this.
Because it seemed like there's I've always wanted a motorcycle, and
listen, I own Harley Davidson stock. Okay, so
do you?
I need everybody listening to this podcast to go out and get yourself a hog.
No, you know what you wouldn't be the judge, you would be the peacemaker, because it sounds like you just, whatever you're saying, it's the opposite of what should actually be.
I'm a congressman. I just passed the bill. I'm giving motorcycle grants to everybody. Go out and get yourself a hog, preferably a Harley.
But yeah, to get back to this Dax Shepard thing, so obviously he's married to Kristen Bell, and so they're having to kind of go through this together. I don't necessarily care to talk about these things all that often, because I honestly don't think it's really anybody else's business other than the people that they want to be aware of it, which arguably I guess is everybody, since they, he said this on the podcast, so he knows that everybody's going to end up hearing it. But I think these are the type of things that, like, everybody's going through some shit, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying that his is more or less relevant than anybody else's. I think we're all of our problems are relevant to us, right? But it's just like for us to then like talk about this and like, you know, go through the story. It's like taking some sort of like family business, right? And then being like, all right, let's talk about that on the podcast. And it's like, well, no, like that's something you handle, you know, within a family. And maybe you do talk about it on a podcast, but that's your choice. But I guess critiquing it or talking about it is just weird because it's just like, yeah, it's something that somebody's going through, you know, and it's, I don't know. Strange.
I admire his willingness to like be open about it, right? Because I think what he understands is that he's not the only one who's experiencing these things. Like there are probably other people who are like being celebrated for their sobriety, you know, or their family members and friends are supporting their sobriety, but internally they're questioning, like, have I been as honest about my sobriety to myself as they think I am, right? So in Dax's situation, he's like, well, you know, yeah, I've been sober, but I've had like little episodes where I've enjoyed, you know, Vicodin pills because of a motorcycle accident, which is a real reason, right? And you're really dealing with pain. So you're not, you didn't get the drugs to abuse them. You got them to address real pain, but like
foggy line is what I would say.
Maybe you abuse it a little bit.
I would say that's a very foggy line, which is why I think, you know, if you do end up in an accident, things like that, it has to be like under really like controlled circumstances that like you, like, that's why he was even saying that like he was prescribed stuff for that, but that he would have to give it to Kristen in order to like give to him because, you know, it's not, you don't want to trust yourself with that because you're just being like, in pain. All right.
But even then you could abuse it a little bit, right? You can say you're in pain when you're not, and you can like maybe like
but that at least
that
limits
person
it
into giving you the pills when you shouldn't. But either way, I just think I admire his bravery here for speaking about these things publicly. Well, he didn't have to address this, right? Nobody knew. This could have been a private family matter between him and his wife. I believe they have children. This could have been a private family matter. He chose to address it publicly. And I would imagine it's because he thinks that like, hey, I'm going through this thing. There are other people who are probably going through this thing. And if I share my story, maybe other people can confront their truth or share their truth, then maybe this could help somebody. So I admire that about him. One thing I hate about the internet is like, I think there are already starting to be conversations bubbling about like, you know, people would love to attack your character any way that they can, right? And Kristen Bell, his wife, you know, we know her from Frozen. We know her from what is the show with Don Cheadle, House of Cards?
House of Lies, I believe.
House of Lies. Yep, yeah. House of Lies. She was also in like she plays who's that investigator? Not Jessica Jones.
Veronica Mars.
Veronica Mars. Yeah. So she's put together a really stellar body of work too. And I think like what's going to happen now is like, you know, the internet troll is going to come out and start to question her. Like, you know, was she like there for him in his sobriety? Like, what should she have done more?
But that's right? Kind of like what I'm saying is that like, why like introduce all those conversations into your life when you're already dealing with something that's like tremendously like difficult to like really sort of get a sense of reality around, right? So it's just like, and again, you're right. Maybe he was saying this in order to like make other people feel comfortable with coming out with their, you know, or being more honest with themselves. I don't know. I think that when you're dealing with something like this, people on the internet, people just in real life, you know, sometimes you just act stupid, you know, and they say stupid things and they talk about things that they have no concept of, you know, that they don't know your life, you know, and every detail about what you're going through. They only know what they're hearing. Sometimes they might even go from that. They just go with whatever they make up in their, you know, in their minds.
Whatever somebody else said, I'm going with that too.
So I think these are all tremendously hard conversations to like talk about because I don't feel entirely like comfortable with speculating or commenting on somebody else's like real life issue that they're working out. And I might be a hypocrite because we might talk all the time on the podcast about shit and maybe, you know, it just isn't as bad or I guess as
it's not as like sensitive this, right?
As you know, going through, you know, some relapses, but I don't know. I just think that my only commentary on it is, I hope he, you know, finds a better space. It seems like he's trying to do that. And I hope that he can get to a better space. And one thing about life is that like, that's not a destination, right? That's a constant struggle every day to get to a space where, you know, you're doing the things you're supposed to do, and you're living like a healthier life. So I hope he gets to that place where he can consistently every day do that. But I also hope that for for everybody, you know, including myself, where you know, you can get up every day and renew that sense of like, okay, let's do this again, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, and to your point, I don't have like any speculations or comments about it. I just, you know, as I said before, I admire his bravery and willingness to talk about this. And I would imagine he and Kristen have had this discussion in private and have figured out a way to make it work for their marriage before he spoke about it publicly. So like they've already figured out how to deal with this. And this is an opportunity for him to share his story in a way that may help other people, right? Like Will and Jada have a very public relationship. I think they have a public relationship too. Will and Jada, whenever they talk about like issues in their marriage, that like you know, they talk about the August Alsina thing, right? Which happened years ago, and they've already dealt with that thing. So now they can talk about it publicly. I would imagine that's what happened here with Dax talking about his relapse. And you know, as you said, so another Will Smith reference, you're only ever in the pursuit of happiness, right? You can be happy, but you're still always pursuing happiness.
Yeah. So I think that's a nice way to sort of button that conversation up.